The morning sun filtered through Venetian blinds at Cedar Falls Medical Center, casting thin stripes across linoleum that had witnessed 3 decades of bad news delivered in sterile rooms. Raymond Sullivan sat in the examination chair, his 81-year-old frame thinner than the Marine uniform hanging in his closet would accommodate. Any more watching Dr. Morrison arrange films on the lightbox with the careful deliberation of a man who'd rehearsed this conversation 100 times but never got comfortable with it. The doctor's fingers traced dark masses that bloomed across Ray's skeletal system like ink spreading through water. Spine, liver, 3 ribs on the left side. The prostate cancer they'd been monitoring for 18 months had stopped asking permission and started taking territory. Dr. Morrison turned from the lightbox, his face carrying that particular expression medical professionals cultivate when hope becomes a cruelty rather than a comfort. The words came out practiced but not unkind, 3 months, maybe 4. If the pain stayed manageable, palliative care could start next week. Hospice arrangements should be discussed with family. Ray's hands remained folded in his lap, the skin liver-spotted and crossed with scars that had their own stories from a hill in Korea 70 years ago. His wedding ring caught the fluorescent light worn thin from 5 decades of marriage to Martha before cancer took her 15 years back. The symmetry wasn't lost on him. The room smelled like antiseptic and the particular kind of fear that accumulates in places where bodies get bad news. Ray had smelled worse, cordite and blood and the strange copper scent of men dying in frozen mud. This was just another hill to climb, except this time the enemy was inside him and there'd be no extraction helicopter waiting at the summit. Morrison was still talking something about pain management protocols and quality of life considerations, but Ray's attention had drifted to the window where October sunlight painted the Montana landscape in colors his grandmother would have called God showing off. He'd lived 81 years in this country, fought for it when he was barely old enough to shave, buried his wife in it, raised 4 children who'd scattered to their own lives. The idea of leaving it didn't frighten him so much as make him tired in a way that had nothing to do with the cancer. The doctor's voice cut through his reverie with a question that required an actual answer. Had he told his family? Were there arrangements that needed to be made? Did he understand the trajectory they were discussing? Ray's response came out flat, carrying the weight of 7 decades practicing emotional discipline. No morphine. He wanted his mind clear for whatever time remained. No, he hadn't told his children yet, and the doctor wouldn't either. That was an order, not a request. Yes, he understood perfectly well that he was dying. He'd been dying since the moment he was born. This just gave him a deadline to work with. Dr. Morrison started to protest the secrecy, something about family having a right to prepare, but Ray's stare shut that down. The same look that had made privates check their weapons twice and corporals question their life choices. Some things you told people when they needed to know, not when it was convenient. He'd figure out the right time, or he wouldn't, and they'd figure it out themselves when he stopped showing up to things. The drive home took Ray through downtown Cedar Falls, population 3,200, and changed the kind of town where everybody knew your business, but pretended they didn't unless you needed help. Main Street still had the old theater marquee from 1952, though the building behind it sold antiques now instead of showing pictures. The hardware store where Ray had bought his first hammer 40 years ago occupied the same corner, 3rd generation of Johnson's behind the counter. The bank, the pharmacy, the diner where he took breakfast most Saturdays with Sarah when she drove up from the city. His house sat 3 miles outside town on 12 acres that had seemed like a kingdom when he'd bought it in 1968 and now felt like a maintenance project he'd never finish. White 2-story with green shutters, Martha had insisted on big front porch where they'd watch their kids grow up in summers that bled together into one long memory of sprinklers and screen doors and the particular quality of light that exists only in childhood recollections. Inside the place showed signs of a widower's habitation. Clean but not decorated, functional but not lived in, not really. The living room still had Martha's furniture arranged the way she'd liked it, though Ray had stopped sitting in her chair years ago. The kitchen held 1 plate, 1 bowl, 1 coffee mug, and the drying rack. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms stayed closed, except when grandchildren visited, which happened less often as they got older and found their own lives more interesting than watching an old man putter around a house that remembered better days. Ray climbed the stairs with his hand on the railing, each step a negotiation with joints that had logged too many miles. His bedroom occupied the master suite stripped down to essentials. Bed, dresser, nightstand with a lamp, and the bottle of pills Dr. Morrison had prescribed 6 months ago when the pain started getting ambitious. The closet held his clothes arranged with military precision, including the dress blues he hadn't worn since Martha's funeral. He sat on the bed's edge, the mattress sagging in the spot his body had carved over decades, and let the weight of the diagnosis settle into him like cold water finding level. 3 months, 90 days give or take. He'd lived 30,000 days already. What was 90 more? His gaze drifted to the dresser where photographs documented a life lived largely for other people. Wedding day Martha in white with flowers in her hair, and a smile that had convinced him the universe occasionally got things right. Daniel at 8 holding a baseball bat bigger than he was. Sarah at 6 missing her front teeth. The two younger kids whose names he sometimes had to work to remember in the right order when he was tired. Grandchildren in various stages of growth, faces that shifted and changed between visits until he sometimes wasn't sure which child belonged to which parent. And buried in the back underneath insurance papers and old tax returns, the photographs from Korea. Black and white images of young men who thought they were invincible right up until they learned otherwise. Ray at 1970 pounds heavier with muscle and baby fat standing next to Tommy Chen in front of a bunker on Porkchop Hill. Both of them grinning like they were on vacation instead of 3 days away from an artillery barrage that would reduce their unit by half and end Tommy's life in a way that still woke Ray up, sometimes even 70 years later. Tommy Chen. The name still carried weight. The debt still sat unpaid despite 7 decades of interest accumulating. Ray had tried after the war track down Tommy's widow Lily through Marine Corps records, but she'd remarried quickly a defense contractor named Morrison, who'd adopted Tommy's son Robert, and given the family a fresh start that apparently didn't include uncomfortable reminders of the first husband who'd died overseas. Ray had sent one letter. It came back marked, "Return to sender." He tried twice more over the years, but the Chens had vanished into America's vast anonymity, protected by new names and geographic distance from a past they'd chosen to leave behind. Ray opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the metal lockbox that held his important papers. Birth certificate, discharge papers, Martha's death certificate, which he could never quite bring himself to file away properly. And beneath those, sealed in a plastic bag, a letter he'd written 10 years ago and never found the courage to send. The envelope was addressed to Daniel Sullivan in Ray's careful handwriting, back when his hands were steadier and the arthritis hadn't started making every pen stroke a negotiation. He'd written it the night after their last real conversation, the one where Daniel had announced he was leaving the Army after 8 years, and Ray had said things he'd regretted before the words finished leaving his mouth. Things about duty and Sullivan family tradition and what it meant to quit something you'd started. Things that had put a wall between them that neither man knew how to climb. The letter was an apology, though Ray had trouble with that word even written down where nobody could hear him say it. 3 pages explaining what he'd been too proud or too stupid or too something to say out loud, that he'd been wrong, that he'd judged Daniel through the lens of his own fears and failures, that he'd wanted his son to be a better Marine than Ray had been, and in that wanting had forgotten to let Daniel be himself, that he was proud of the man his son had become, even if it wasn't the man Ray had expected him to be. 10 years that letter had sat in the drawer undelivered. Ray had taken it out dozens of times, held it up to the light, traced his own words with fingers that shook slightly from something that wasn't age. Each time he'd convinced himself tomorrow would be better for sending it. Tomorrow he'd feel braver. Tomorrow the words would land right instead of wrong. Tomorrow the distance between them wouldn't feel quite so much like an ocean he was too tired to swim. Except tomorrow had become today, 90 days in a row, and the letter stayed in its envelope, and Daniel stayed on the other side of their mutual silence, and the wall stood intact. Ray slid the letter back into the lockbox and closed the drawer. 3 months, maybe 4. That changed the math on tomorrow. His phone buzzed with a text message, the ringtone Martha had programmed before she died because she thought it was funny. Sarah's name appeared on the screen with news delivered in her particular style of aggressive optimism. "Dad, good news. Daniel agreed to come to breakfast tomorrow. First time in 10 years. Please don't screw this up." Ray stared at the message long enough that the screen dimmed. "Daniel, breakfast, tomorrow. The universe occasionally had a sense of timing that felt less like coincidence and more like a test you hadn't studied for. He typed back with the slow deliberation of someone who'd learned technology late and reluctantly, "I'll be there." What time Sarah's response came instantly, the way young people's messages always did, like they'd been born with phones in their hands. 8 a.m. Crystal's Diner. "And Dad? Be nice, he's trying." Ray didn't respond to that because what was there to say? Of course he'd be nice. He was always nice. Civility was easy. Connection was hard. The gap between those two things had swallowed his relationship with his son somewhere around 2014 and never given it back. He stood from the bed joints protesting and walked to the closet. The dress blues hung in the back wrapped in plastic from the dry cleaner, waiting for the kind of occasion that required a man to put on his history and wear it like armor. Martha's funeral, Daniel's wedding before the divorce, Sarah's husband's military promotion ceremony. Moments when Ray needed to remember who he'd been before age and time, and accumulated regrets had worn him down to someone who spent most days deciding whether getting out of bed was worth the effort. The uniform still fit mostly, shoulders a little loose where muscle had surrendered to time, waist actually tighter than it used to be, cancer's appetite, apparently extending to Ray's appetite. But the medals were all there, arranged in proper order. Purple Heart, Silver Star he'd never told his kids about because heroism felt less impressive when you remembered you'd been terrified the whole time. Korean Service Medal, the rest of them, brass and ribbon, testifying to the fact that Raymond Sullivan had shown up when called and done what needed doing and somehow survived to become old enough that survival itself felt like the real achievement. He left the uniform in its plastic and closed the closet door. Tomorrow would be difficult enough without dressing like he was already attending his own funeral. The evening passed the way his evenings usually did, microwave dinner eaten at the kitchen table with a book he wasn't really reading, television news. That depressed him, shower in bed by 9, because staying up late when you lived alone felt pointless. The pills on his nightstand promised 4 to 6 hours of sleep if he was lucky, 2 to 3 if the cancer decided to remind him who was in charge. He took them dry, turned off the light, and lay in the darkness, listening to the house settle around him. Sleep came eventually, though it brought dreams that were less rest and more archaeological expedition through memory. Korea again, always Korea. The hill they'd called Pork Chop because some general somewhere had thought geographic nomenclature should be whimsical. The bunker he'd shared with Tommy Chen and 3 other Marines whose names Ray couldn't remember anymore, though he still saw their faces sometimes when he closed his eyes. The dream followed its usual script. Chinese artillery coming in waves, the sky lighting up like something biblical. Rounds landing close enough to fill the bunker with dust and the smell of high explosives. Tommy checking ammunition counts his hand steady, even though his voice shook when he spoke. The moment when the grenade came arcing through the bunker entrance, lazy and inevitable as death itself. Tommy's eyes meeting Ray's in the second before he threw himself onto it. The explosion that Ray felt more than heard, the pressure wave that drove the air from his lungs, the ringing that lasted 3 days afterward. And Tommy's body torn open in ways that made Ray understand why some soldiers came home and never talked about what they'd seen. The blood, the smell, the particular weight of a friend's corpse when you tried to drag it somewhere safe, even though safe didn't exist anymore, and the body didn't care. Ray jerked awake at 3 a.m., heart-hammering sheets damp with sweat that had nothing to do with room temperature. The nightmare clung to him like smoke, refusing to dissipate even when he turned on the lamp and forced his eyes to focus on the bedroom's familiar geography. Not Korea, Montana, not 1952, 2024, not 19 years old, 81 dying slowly instead of quickly, which was supposed to be better, though Ray wasn't entirely convinced. He got up, took another pill, even though Dr. Morrison's instructions said wait 4 hours minimum between doses, and went downstairs to wait for sunrise. The living room's big window faced east, offering a view of mountains that predated America by millions of years and would outlast it by millions more. Ray sat in his chair, not Martha's, never Martha's, and watched the sky transition from black to gray to the particular shade of October blue that made Montana worth the winters. His phone showed 6 a.m. when he finally dragged himself upright and started the process of becoming presentable enough for public consumption. Shower, shave, though his hands shook enough that he nicked himself twice and had to hold tissue paper to his jaw until the bleeding stopped. Clothes chosen with the same care he'd once applied to inspecting weapons, clean jeans, flannel shirt Martha had bought him 5 Christmases ago, the Korean War veteran jacket he wore like a second skin because it told the world who he was in case he forgot. The drive into Cedar Falls took 20 minutes through country that was slowly surrendering to development. New houses sprouting on what used to be rangeland, a Walmart where cattle used to graze. Progress, they called it, though. Ray wasn't sure progress meant the same thing to everyone. He'd grown up in a world where you knew your neighbors and borrowed tools and waved at strangers. Now people live behind fences and security systems in the kind of suspicion that came from watching too much news about how dangerous everything had become. Crystal's Diner occupied a corner lot on Main Street, its neon sign proclaiming good food, since 1982 in letters that buzzed even in daylight. The building had weathered 4 decades of economic cycles and changing ownership, but the bones remained the same: red vinyl booths, black and white checkered floor counter, with swivel stools where farmers discussed wheat prices and weather with the authority of men whose livelihoods depended on both. Betty Morgan owned the place now, 68 years of life experience etched into a face that had learned to smile through disappointments. Her husband had died in 1968, Marine lieutenant who'd walked into an ambush outside Hughes City and never walked out. Betty had kept his photograph behind the register for 42 years, young and proud, in dress blues, frozen at an age she'd long since passed. She'd raised 2 daughters alone, worked 3 while, bought the diner in 1989, and made it into the kind of place where people came not just for food, but for the feeling that someone remembered their name and cared whether they showed up. She greeted Ray at the door with the easy familiarity of someone who'd served him coffee every Saturday for a decade. Early today, Ray. Big plans, family breakfast. My son's coming. Betty's eyebrows rose in a way that suggested she knew exactly which son and how long it had been. Well, isn't that something? Your usual booth, please. The booth by the window had been Ray's spot since 1982, the year Martha had dragged him in here, insisting the pancakes were worth the drive. She'd been right about that, though she'd been right about most things. The vinyl had been replaced twice, but the view remained constant. Main Street stretching north toward the mountain storefronts that changed hands and purposes, but kept their architecture, the crosswalk where he'd taught Daniel to ride a bicycle 30 years ago. Linda Parker appeared with coffee and a patience that came from 15 years of waitressing. She was 54, divorced, raising a grandson because her daughter had made choices that required grandparents to step in and do the work all over again. Ray knew this because Crystal's was the kind of place where you learned people's stories whether you asked or not, where tragedy and triumph got discussed over scrambled eggs, and everyone pretended not to listen while remembering every word. She poured his coffee without asking, the gesture automatic and oddly comforting. Sarah coming today, and my son, Daniel. Linda's smile suggested she knew that name carried complications. That's wonderful, Ray. Family's important. Ray wrapped his hands around the mug and let the heat sink into joints that ached regardless of temperature. Through the window, Cedar Falls was coming awake: pickup trucks, parallel parking store owners, unlocking doors, the Saturday morning rhythm of a town that had survived economic collapse and population loss by stubbornly refusing to die. His grandparents had homesteaded 40 miles north in 1911. His parents had built a life here when that meant something different than it did now. He'd raised his children here, buried his wife here, and would be buried here himself in about 90 days if Dr. Morrison's math held up. The thought didn't frighten him as much as it probably should have. Death was just the hill you climbed when all the other hills were behind you. He'd made peace with that in Korea, watching Tommy Chen's blood soak into frozen ground. Every day after that had been borrowed time interest accumulating on a debt he'd never figured out how to repay. Sarah arrived at 7:45, 15 minutes early, because she'd inherited Martha's inability to be late for anything. She slid into the booth across from him, 49 years old, but still recognizable as the 6-year-old who'd climbed into his lap during thunderstorms and made him promise the lightning wouldn't get them. Elementary school teacher, now divorced 5 years back from a husband Ray had never particularly liked, but had kept his opinions about to himself because that's what fathers did. 2 kids of her own, teenagers, navigating the particular hell of high school in an era where everything was documented and nothing was forgotten. She studied his face with the intensity of someone cataloging damage. You look tired, Dad. Are you sleeping? Well enough, have you been to the doctor lately? You look thin. The lie came easily because he'd been practicing it for 3 months. Just a checkup last week. Everything's fine. Don't fuss. Sarah's expression suggested she didn't believe him, but had learned not to push. The Sullivan family crest should have been a closed door with no welcome mat. She changed the subject to safer territory. Emma made the volleyball team. Rachel's applying to colleges, though God knows how we'll pay for it. Work is work, too many students and not enough hours to teach them properly. Ray listened and made appropriate sounds while his attention drifted to the door, waiting for the figure who might or might not show up. Daniel had agreed to come, but agreement and attendance were different things. 10 years was a long time to hold a grudge or a hurt or whatever name you gave the space between fathers and sons when words failed and silence took over. 8 a.m. arrived with no Daniel, then 8:05, 8 to 10. Sarah checked her phone with increasing frequency. He said he was coming. He promised. Traffic probably. It's fine. But it wasn't fine, and they both knew it. Each minute that passed felt like confirmation that some wounds didn't heal. Just because you wanted them to, that broken thing stayed broken, that Ray's last chance to fix this might be slipping away while he sat in a diner drinking coffee that had gone cold. The door swung open at 8:17 and Daniel Sullivan walked in carrying a decade of distance like a weight he couldn't set down. 52 years old, 6'2", shoulders broadened by construction, work arms covered in tattoos that told stories Ray had never been invited to hear. He wore jeans and a black t-shirt and a leather vest that proclaimed him president of the Iron Brotherhood Motorcycle Club, patches arranged with military precision because some habits never died. He spotted them in this booth and hesitated just a fraction of a second, but long enough that Ray saw the uncertainty. Then he straightened and walked over with the kind of controlled confidence that comes from leading men who've seen combat and don't follow just anyone. Their eyes met across 3 feet of distance that might as well have been 3 miles. Pop, son. An entire conversation happened in that pause, years of missed birthdays and unanswered phone calls, and things said in anger that couldn't be unsaid. Then Daniel slid into the booth next to Sarah, and the three of them sat in awkward silence, while Linda approached with fresh coffee and a tactful retreat. Sarah tried to fill the void with cheerful updates. Nobody particularly wanted Rachel's college applications, Emma's volleyball, her own job stress. Daniel nodded at appropriate moments, but his attention stayed on Ray, cataloging damage the same way Sarah had. The weight loss, the pallor, the way Ray's hands shook slightly when he lifted his coffee mug. You look different, Pop. Just getting old. Happens to everyone. Not like that. Are you sick? The lie Ray had prepared caught in his throat because lying to Daniel's face proved harder than lying over text messages or through Sarah's relayed information. Just tired. Long week. Daniel's expression suggested he knew bullshit when he heard it, but was choosing not to press. Another piece of Sullivan family tradition, pretending problems didn't exist until they became too big to ignore. The silence stretched until Sarah couldn't stand it anymore. Dad has something he wants to tell you, Daniel. Ray shot her a look that should have ignited her hair, but Sarah had inherited his stubbornness along with his eyes. She stared back with the expression of someone who decided this breakfast was happening, whether anyone liked it or not. Ray's hand went to his jacket pocket, where the letter sat folded into quarters, carried here with the vague intention of handing it over and letting 10 years of unsaid things finally get said. But pulling it out required a kind of courage he couldn't quite locate at 8:20 on a Saturday morning, with his son's careful attention making him feel seen in a way he'd spent a decade avoiding. Before he could decide, the diner's atmosphere changed. 3 young men crashed through the entrance with the aggressive energy of people who'd decided the world owed them attention and they were here to collect. Late 20s, moving with the twitchy alertness of methamphetamine or anger, or both. The one in front, tawdry, lean, wearing defiance-like armor, scanned the room with eyes that had learned to look for weakness. They commandeered a booth near the center, their voices carrying across the diner's morning quiet, demanding service before they'd fully sat down. Linda approached with menus and her professional waitress smile, the one that said she'd dealt with worse and survived. The tall one grabbed the menus, without thanks, his attention already elsewhere. His 2 friends settled in with the pack mentality of people who'd bonded over shared bad decisions. Their conversation carried profanity loud enough to make the elderly couple at the counter shift uncomfortably. Ray tried to ignore them, refocusing on Daniel and the letter burning a hole in his pocket, and the approximately 89 days he had left to fix 10 years of damage. But his attention kept drifting back to the three young men, to the way they treated Linda like furniture, when she brought water, to the casual cruelty that people inflicted on service workers because they could. Sarah was saying something about Thanksgiving plans, her voice determinedly cheerful when the crash came. Coffee pot shattering on the floor. Linda stumbling backward, the tall young man's boot exactly where her hand had been a second earlier. His laughter cut through the diner's sudden silence, joined by his friends' voices in a harmony of meanness that made Ray's jaw tighten. Linda apologized, automatic condition, and knelt to clean the mess. The young man said something vulgar about her weight, about her age, about the speed of her service. His friends echoed it, amplified it, turned cruelty into entertainment. Ray's hands flattened on the table. Sarah's voice cut through his rising anger. "Dad, don't." But Daniel wasn't looking at Ray. Daniel was looking at the young man with Linda's spilled coffee spreading across the floor, his expression shifting from wary to cold in the space between heartbeats. His hands, which had been wrapped around his coffee mug, moved to the table's edge. The leather vest creaked slightly as his shoulders tensed. Ray felt something old and familiar wake up in his chest. The same feeling he'd had in Korea when Tommy Chen had needed backup, when the hill needed defending, when standing by stopped being an option, and doing something became the only choice that let you look at yourself in mirrors afterward. He stood before he'd fully decided to stand, his body making the choice his mind was still debating. The booth bench scraped against the floor. Sarah's hand grabbed for his arm. "Dad, please, just let Betty call the police." But Ray was already moving toward the young men's booth, each step measured and deliberate, his back straight, in the way it hadn't been for months, his shoulders squared. Behind him, he heard Daniel say something to Sarah, heard the leather vest moving, heard footsteps following, but not stopping him. The diner fell into the kind of silence that precedes violence or wisdom, that moment when everyone holds their breath, wondering which way things will tip. Ray reached the booth where the three young men sat, his shadow falling across their table, his presence impossible to ignore. The tall one looked up with eyes that held no respect for age or experience, or the simple human decency of acknowledging someone who'd survived 81 years of a world that broke most people long before they got that far. He started to say something dismissive, something Ray had heard variations of throughout his life, from people who'd never learned that cruelty was weakness, dressed as strength. Ray's voice came out calm but carried the weight of 7 decades learning when to speak and what to say. "Son, I think you owe the lady an apology." The young man stood slowly, unfolding to his full height, which brought him roughly level with Ray's collarbone. His friends shifted in their seats, uncertain whether to be amused or alarmed. The diner watched every patron frozen in place, Betty behind the register, with one hand reaching for the phone. The young man's response came loaded with contempt. "Who the fuck are you, old man? Someone who knows how to treat people with respect. Something your parents clearly never taught you." The words landed like a slap, and perhaps that's why the young man's hand moved. Or perhaps it was the meth-making decisions his sober brain would have reconsidered. Or perhaps he was just the kind of person who'd learned to solve problems with violence because thinking was harder. His palm caught Ray across the face hard enough to snap his head sideways. The sound echoed in the diner's stunned silence. Ray stumbled backward, caught the edge of a table, his hand going to his cheek where heat bloomed. His lips split against his teeth, blood filling his mouth with the copper taste he remembered from Korea. For a moment, Ray just stood there, his hand on his face, looking at the young man with an expression that held more sadness than anger. As if he'd asked the world a question and gotten an answer that confirmed his worst suspicions about how far things had fallen while he wasn't paying attention. Sarah screamed his name. Betty grabbed the phone. The elderly couple at the counter sat frozen. Linda covered her mouth with both hands. The diner's other patrons collectively stopped breathing. Daniel moved forward, but Ray raised his other hand in a gesture that meant, "Wait, not yet." He straightened slowly, taking his hand away from his face, revealing the blood that had started running down his chin. His eyes never left the young man who'd hit him. "What's your father's name, son?" The question clearly wasn't what anyone expected. The young man blinked, his bravado flickering. "What? Your father. The soldier you mentioned. What was his name? Chen. Robert Chen, Vietnam. Why the fuck do you care?" The name hit Ray like a second slap, harder than the first. His face went white. His hand found the table again, gripping it hard enough that his knuckles stood out. The diner spun slightly, or maybe that was just Ray's balance failing, or maybe the universe had a sense of irony that extended to making impossible coincidences feel like cosmic jokes. Tommy Chen's boy, you're Tommy's grandson. Before the young man could respond, before Ray could process what his mouth had just said, the diner's door swung open. The sound cut through everything else, metal and glass, and the particular quality of silence that comes right before everything changes. Daniel had been moving toward Ray, but stopped his body, recognizing something his brain was still catching up to. Everyone turned toward the entrance. Everyone watched as a wall of leather and muscle and 40 years of accumulated military experience filed through Crystal's diner's front door like an occupying force that had decided occupation would be peaceful only so long as everyone cooperated. 8 men in leather vests bearing patches that identified them as Iron Brotherhood Motorcycle Club. Different ages, different backgrounds, unified by something that went deeper than fashion or rebellion. They moved with the coordinated precision of people who'd learned to trust each other in places where trust meant survival. The way they positioned themselves wasn't threatening exactly, but it was deliberate. Doorway covered, exits marked, sightlines clear. The young man who'd slapped Ray suddenly looked very small and very young, and very aware that he'd miscalculated badly. Daniel walked past his brothers, past the stunned patrons, straight to Ray. His hand went to his father's shoulder, gentle, despite the calluses. "Pop, you okay?" Ray nodded, still processing the name he'd just heard. Still trying to reconcile the young man who'd hit him with the photograph he kept in his dresser drawer of Tommy Chen grinning outside a bunker 70 years ago. Still feeling the weight of decades-old debt demanding payment in a form he couldn't have anticipated if he'd lived another 81 years. Daniel turned to face the 3 young men, and the temperature in the diner dropped about 15 degrees. His voice came out quiet, which somehow made it more intimidating than if he'd shouted. "Do you know who you just hit?" The young man who'd slapped Ray tried to muster defiance, but it came out weak. "Some old guy who, that's my father. Raymond Sullivan. He's 81 years old. 70 years ago, he was 19 and scared and thousands of miles from home, fighting in a war. So people like you could grow up free and safe and have the right to be as stupid as you're being right now." The 2 friends shifted uncomfortably. Betty had put the phone down but kept her hand near it. The Motorcycle Club brothers stood silent, as monuments, their presence enough of a statement that words would have been redundant. Daniel continued, his voice never rising but somehow filling every corner of the diner. He spent his whole life treating people with respect. Raised 4 kids by himself after my mother passed. Worked 2 jobs and never complained. Volunteers at the VA hospital every Tuesday helping other veterans who are struggling. And you just slapped him because he asked you to apologize for being rude to a waitress. One of the friends looked down at his shoes. The other swallowed hard. Reality was setting in the way it does when bravado meets consequence and discovers the exchange rate isn't favorable. The young man who'd done the slapping seemed to be having some kind of internal crisis, his face cycling through emotions faster than he could process them. The meth making things worse, probably. And are better depending on your perspective and whether clarity during catastrophe counted as improvement. The diner door opened again and Sheriff Tom Braddock walked in with the slow, measured pace of someone who'd responded to enough calls at Crystal's over the years to know that rushing usually made things worse. 55 years old, former Army MP, wearing the kind of authority that came from actually earning it rather than just pinning it to a uniform. He took in the scene with practiced efficiency. Ray bleeding, Daniel standing protective, 3 young men who looked like they regretted their life choices. 8 motorcycle club members who technically weren't breaking any laws, but also weren't not making a statement. Betty behind the register. Linda still kneeling by the spilled coffee. Every patron in the place frozen like extras in a movie waiting for the director to yell, "Cut." Braddock's attention settled on Ray. "You want to tell me what happened here?" And that's when the back door crashed open. That's when Victor Reyes walked in with 4 men whose body language suggested they were comfortable with violence in a way that went beyond recreational. That's when Saturday morning breakfast at Crystal's Diner became something that would get talked about in Cedar Falls for years afterward, the story growing and changing with each retelling until nobody quite remembered what had actually happened versus what made a better narrative. Victor Reyes was 40 years old and looked like 50, the kind of weathering that came from life decisions that accelerated aging. He moved with the careful control of someone who knew he was dangerous and wanted everyone else to know it too. His eyes scanned the room, cataloged threats, dismissed most of them, and landed on the young man who'd slapped Ray. "There you are, Brennan. Been looking everywhere." The young man Brennan, apparently Tommy Chen's grandson, carrier of debts he didn't know existed, went pale. His friends looked like they wanted to disappear. The motorcycle club brothers shifted positions, subtly flanking without making it obvious they were flanking. Victor's attention moved to Daniel, to the patches on the leather vest, to the 8 men who'd spread out across the diner in a formation that wasn't accidental. Iron Brotherhood. Since when does Tyler Brennan have friends? Daniel stepped forward, placing himself between Victor and Ray, between Victor and Tyler, between whatever was about to happen and the people who didn't need to be involved. His voice stayed level. "What's your business here?" Victor smiled without warmth. "Brennan owes me $15,000. I'm here to collect." Tyler's voice cracked when he spoke. "Victor, please, I just need a few more days." Victor pulled a gun from his waistband, not pointing it at anyone specifically, but making its presence known. The universal language of negotiations backed by the threat of violence. No more days. "You pay now or I start shooting people you care about." He gestured with the gun, casual and terrifying old man who just got slapped. "This pretty girl. The waitress. How about the old lady at the register?" Sheriff Braddock's hand moved toward his own weapon, but stopped the math not working out in his favor. One sheriff, 4 armed men, a diner full of civilians. Betty's hand moved toward the phone again, but froze when one of Victor's men shook his head slowly. Ray stood, blood still running down his chin, his balance questionable, but his voice steady. "Put the gun away, son. Nobody's dying in Betty's diner." Victor laughed, the sound carrying genuine amusement. "Who the fuck are you, old man? Someone who's already dying, so your threats don't scare me." The statement landed in the diner's charged silence like a stone dropping into still water, ripples spreading outward. Sarah made a small sound. Daniel's head turned sharply. The motorcycle club brothers exchanged glances. Even Victor's certainty wavered. "Dying cancer, 3 months, maybe less. So you can shoot me if you want, but you'll be killing a dead man. Doesn't seem worth the bullet." Ray took a step forward, his body swaying slightly, but his gaze locked on Victor's face. "But before you do, answer one question. What's your father's name?" Victor's expression shifted, confusion cutting through the aggressive certainty. "What's your father? I'm guessing he's the reason you're angry at the world. What was his name?" "Victor Reyes Sr. Marine." "What's it to you? Marines don't raise cowards who threaten old women and waitresses. Your father would be ashamed." The gun moved now, pointed directly at Ray's chest. Betty gasped. Sarah moved to stand, but Daniel caught her arm. The motorcycle club brothers tensed but held position, waiting for a signal that hadn't come yet. Victor's voice came out tight with rage. "Don't you talk about my father." Ray didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't acknowledge the weapon aimed at his heart. "Your father served his country, probably saw things that broke him, probably came home to a system that failed him. I see it every Tuesday at the VA. Good men destroyed by bureaucracy and neglect. Is that what happened?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with the kind of truth that made people uncomfortable because it required honest answers. Victor's face worked through emotions, the gun's barrel wavering slightly. Betty's voice cut through the tension calm and carrying the authority of someone who'd owned this space for 42 years. "Sheriff, I'm calling the police now," Braddock nodded. "Everyone stays calm. Victor, you put that weapon down right now or this ends badly for everyone." Victor's attention snapped to Tyler. "You caused this. You made me come here. You made me," Tyler spoke up, his voice shaking but audible. "Victor, wait. That old man, his name is Ray Sullivan. Ask him about Tommy Chen." Victor's confusion deepened. "Who the fuck is Tommy Chen?" "My grandfather, he died in Korea, saved Ray Sullivan's life." Victor lowered the gun slightly, looking at Ray with new attention. "Is that true?" "It is. Tommy Chen was the bravest man I ever knew. And this boy is his grandson." The diner held its collective breath while Victor processed that information. The gun stayed out but pointed at the floor now. His men waited for direction. The motorcycle club brothers stood ready. Sheriff Braddock's hand stayed near his weapon. Betty kept the phone in her hand. Linda remained frozen by the spilled coffee. Sarah gripped the boot's edge hard enough to hurt. Daniel positioned himself between his father and every possible threat. Ray's voice came out tired but firm. You've got choices to make, son, same as we all do. You can be the man your father was before the war broke him. Or you can be what the world made you. But you don't get to be both. Victor stared at Ray for a long moment, the gun hanging loose in his hand, his expression cycling through calculations Ray couldn't read. Then he spoke and the words came out clipped and final. Okay, old man, you got my attention. Here's the deal. You've got 48 hours to get me 15 grand. If not, I kill Brennan, I kill you, and I burn this whole fucking diner down. Clock starts now. He turned and walked toward the back door, his men following. Before exiting, he looked back at Ray one more time. 2 days, viejo. Don't make me come back. The door closed behind them. The diner erupted into chaos, voices. Overlapping people standing, Betty actually calling the police now. Linda finally getting up from the floor. Daniel's hands were on Ray's shoulders, checking him over, his voice rough with emotion Ray couldn't quite name. And Ray stood in the center of it all, blood drying on his chin, his letter to Daniel still undelivered in his pocket, Tyler Brennan's eyes meeting his across the diner with a mixture of shame and confusion and something that might have been recognition. Tommy Chen's grandson, 70 years of debt, 48 hours until Victor Reyes made good on his threat. Daniel finally willing to talk after a decade of silence. 3 months to live, turning into 3 days if things went wrong. Ray's hand went to his jacket pocket, felt the letter there, and made a decision. Tomorrow he'd give Daniel the apology. Today he'd figure out how to save Tommy's grandson from the consequences of choices that probably made more sense when you were high on meth and didn't understand that actions had costs that came due eventually. The room spun slightly. Ray's knees decided they'd been holding him up long enough and would like to renegotiate their contract. Daniel caught him before he hit the floor. Strong arms that reminded Ray distantly of carrying Daniel as a baby, of teaching him to ride a bicycle, of all the moments when being a father had felt natural and right, instead of like something he was perpetually failing at. Sarah was there too, her hand on his face, her voice saying words he couldn't quite process through the ringing in his ears that might have been tinnitus, or might have been the echo of Tommy Chen's last breath 70 years ago, telling Ray to take care of his family, a promise Ray had failed to keep until it walked into a diner and slapped him across the face. Sheriff Braddock was talking to Daniel something about statements and reports and what actually happened here. Betty was giving Linda ice for the bruises forming where she'd hit the floor. The motorcycle club brothers had formed a loose perimeter around the booth where Ray sat bleeding. And Tyler Brennan stood by his own table, looking at Ray like he'd just seen a ghost and wasn't sure whether to run from it or toward it. Ray touched his split lip, looked at the blood on his fingers, and thought about Tommy Chen's blood on his fingers in 1952 and how some stains never washed out no matter how many decades you spent scrubbing. He thought about the letter in his pocket that Daniel still didn't know existed. He thought about $15,000 he didn't have and 48 hours he couldn't afford to waste, and 3 months of life that might not matter if Victor Reyes decided patience was overrated. And he thought about Tyler Brennan, 28 years old and drowning Tommy Chen's grandson, carrying Tommy Chen's eyes in a face that could have been Tommy's if you squinted and allowed for genetics doing their mysterious work across generations. The debt Ray had carried for 70 years had just walked through the door, asking to be paid. The universe had given him a chance to fix something that had been broken since before Tyler was born. And all it would cost was everything Ray had left, which, when you added it up, didn't amount to much. 3 months, some retirement savings, a letter he'd never sent, and whatever remained of the warrior he'd been before time and cancer and accumulated regrets had worn him down to someone who ate microwave dinners alone and counted days like a prisoner watching his sentence run down. Sarah's voice cut through his thoughts. Dad, you need a hospital. I need to go home. You're bleeding. I've bled before. Daniel, take me home. And Daniel did, because that's what sons do even when 10 years of silence sits between them like a wall. Neither one has figured out how to climb. They walked out of Crystal's diner into October sunlight that felt too bright and clean for what had just happened, leaving behind a crime scene that wasn't quite a crime scene, and a community that would spend weeks trying to figure out what they'd witnessed and what it meant. Ray sat in Daniel's truck, some American make he didn't recognize, diesel engine, leather seats, worn from use, and watched Cedar Falls pass outside the window. His town, his life, his 81 years compressed into 12 acres, and a house that needed work and memories that weighed more than the cancer eating through his bones. Daniel drove in silence, his hands tight on the steering wheel, his jaw working like he had things to say, but couldn't find the words to say them. Ray understood that feeling. He'd spent 10 years not finding words. Maybe that's what the Sullivan family did best, hold things in until they festered into something that couldn't be fixed with simple conversation. The truck pulled into Ray's driveway. Daniel killed the engine. Neither man moved for a long moment, sitting in the cab like they'd run out of road and didn't know what came next. Pop, yeah, what the hell was that? That was Tommy Chen's grandson. That was a debt I should have paid 70 years ago. That was the universe giving me a chance to fix something before I run out of time to fix anything. You really have cancer. The lie wouldn't come this time. Ray's hand went to his jacket pocket, pulled out the letter, held it without offering it yet. Stage 4, 3 months, maybe less. Dr. Morrison told me yesterday. Daniel's face did something complicated. Emotions Ray couldn't parse flowing across it like weather. Yesterday, you've known since yesterday 3 months. I've known for 3 months. The silence that followed felt like judgment or grief or both. Daniel's hands stayed on the steering wheel even though the engine was off knuckles white. Ray held out the letter. I wrote this 10 years ago, the night after our last fight. I should have given it to you then. I'm giving it to you now. Daniel took the envelope like it might explode. He opened it, carefully unfolded 3 pages of Ray's handwriting, and began to read. Ray watched his son's face, saw the moment understanding arrived, saw the moment anger softened into something that might have been forgiveness or might just have been exhaustion. When Daniel looked up, his eyes were wet. Pop, why didn't you send this? Because I'm a stubborn old man who thought tomorrow would always be there. Turns out tomorrow has limits. I didn't plan for. I would have come home if I'd known I know. That's why I didn't tell you. I wanted you to come because you wanted to, not because you had to. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Yeah, runs in the family. They sat in the truck for another moment, the October sun warmed through the windshield, the house waiting beyond the driveway like evidence of a life that would continue after Ray stopped being part of it. Somewhere in Cedar Falls, Tyler Brennan was probably panicking. Somewhere Victor Reyes was counting down 48 hours. Somewhere the clock was ticking on multiple deadlines, and Ray Sullivan was sitting in his son's truck, holding the silence that had separated them, and wondering if 3 months was enough time to fix everything that mattered, or if he'd waited too long and some things stayed broken forever. Daniel folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, and tucked it into his own jacket pocket. What do we do about Tyler? We keep him alive. We pay his debt. We do what Tommy Chen would have done if our positions were reversed. With what money I've got, retirement savings. $22,000. Should cover it. Pop, that's your money for you. I'm dying, son. What am I going to spend it on? More pills, a fancier coffin. Daniel's face worked through objections he couldn't quite articulate, then settled on acceptance that looked like defeat. We need to tell Sarah. Not yet. Let me figure out the money part first. Then we'll have the family meeting where everyone cries and makes me promise to fight harder, and I lie and say I will. You're an asshole, you know that. Learn from the best. Mom was a saint. I met my drill sergeant. That got a small laugh, broken and brief but real. Daniel opened the truck door. Come on, let's get you cleaned up. Then we figure out how to save Tommy Chen's grandson from his own stupid choices. They went into the house and Ray showed his son where the first aid kit lived, and Daniel cleaned the blood off Ray's face with surprising gentleness for a man whose hands were calloused from construction work and motorcycle maintenance. The split lip would heal, the bruise would fade, the cancer would kill him in 3 months regardless, but Tommy Chen's grandson would live. That debt would be paid. And maybe Daniel would remember that his father had tried at the end to be better than he'd been in the middle. Maybe that would be enough. Maybe 3 months could hold more redemption than 10 years of silence if you use them right. Ray let his son clean his face, let himself be cared for in a way he hadn't allowed in years, and tried not to think about 48 hours, counting down to consequences he couldn't quite see yet, but knew were coming anyway. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across Ray's kitchen table, where 3 people sat in the kind of silence that forms when everyone knows the truth, but nobody wants to be the first to say it out loud. Sarah had arrived 20 minutes after Daniel called her, driven by the particular urgency that comes from hearing your brother say Dad's been hurt, without elaborating on how or why or whether hospital should be involved. She'd taken one look at Ray's split lip and swelling jaw and gone pale in a way that reminded him of Martha getting bad news, the color draining from her face like someone had opened a valve. Now she sat across from her father, hands wrapped around untouched coffee, her teacher's instinct for reading situations telling her this was bigger than a split lip and a bar fight story that didn't quite add up. Daniel leaned against the counter, his leather vest creaking when he shifted weight, his attention divided between his father and his phone, where messages kept arriving from MC Brothers wanting updates. The house felt smaller with both his children in it, the walls closing in with accumulated history and present crisis and the weight of things that needed saying but kept getting postponed because saying them made them real. Ray broke the silence first because that seemed like a father's job, even when the words tasted like defeat. I have stage 4 prostate cancer. Metastasized to spine and liver. Dr. Morrison says 3 months, maybe 4. No treatment options worth the side effects. I'm not doing chemo or radiation. I'm just going to let it run its course. Sarah's coffee cup hit the table hard enough that liquid sloshed over the rim. Her mouth opened and closed twice before sound came out, and when it did, her voice carried the sharp edge of betrayal. How long have you known? 3 months. 3 months, and you didn't tell us. I'm telling you now. That's not. Daniel, did you know, found out this morning, same time as you. Sarah stood abruptly, her chair scraping against linoleum, her hands moving in gestures that had no destination. She paced to the window, stared out at the yard where she'd played as a child, turned back with tears running down her face, and fury in her voice. What gave you the right to keep this from us? We're your children. We deserve to know when our father is dying. Ray met her anger with the calm that came from having already fought this battle in his own head and lost. You deserve to have 3 more months without that weight. I gave you that. You're welcome. Don't you dare, Sarah's voice cracked. Don't you dare make this about protecting us. We're not children anymore. You don't get to decide what we can handle. Apparently I do, since I'm the one dying, and you're not. The cruelty in that statement landed exactly how Ray intended, shutting down Sarah's protest with the blunt reality that his death belonged to him in a way their grief didn't. He watched his daughter process that, saw the moment she recognized she was arguing about something she'd already lost, saw her fold back into the chair with her face in her hands. Daniel's voice came from the counter, quieter than Sarah's, but carrying its own weight. Pop's got a point. Shitty point, but a point. He gets to die how he wants. We just have to deal with it. I don't want to deal with it. I want him to fight. Nothing to fight. Cancer's already won. I'm just waiting for the final score. Sarah looked up with red eyes and the kind of determination that had gotten her through single parenthood and divorce and teaching 33rd graders every year, despite budget cuts that made her pay for supplies out of pocket. There are trials, experimental treatments. I can research, Sarah. Ray's voice carried enough finality to stop her mid-sentence. I'm 81 years old. I've had a good run, better than most. Tommy Chen died at 20. Your mother made it to 66. I'm getting bonus time at this point. I'm not spending it in hospitals being poisoned by chemicals that might buy me an extra month of feeling like shit. The kitchen fell silent except for the wall clock ticking away seconds that suddenly felt more valuable than they had that morning. Daniel pushed off from the counter and sat down at the table, his massive frame making the chair look delicate. Okay, 3 months. What do you want to do with them? Ray almost smiled. Leave it to Danielle to cut through emotion and get to tactics. The Army had trained that into him, or maybe he'd always been that way, and the Army had just refined it, save Tyler Brennan. Pay his debt, keep Victor Reyes from burning down Betty's diner or killing anyone I care about. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Who the hell is Tyler Brennan? Tommy Chen's grandson. That stopped her. Ray watched understanding bloom across her face as she connected dots between the stories he'd told over decades, Korea Pork Chop Hill, the friend who'd saved his life in the present crisis she'd walked into, the kid who hit you. He's Tommy's grandson. Didn't know it when he hit me. Didn't know I existed. But yeah, Tommy Chen's blood. Robert Chen's son, 28 years old and drowning in meth addiction, in debt to a drug dealer who will absolutely make good on his threats. Daniel pulled out his phone, started typing, "I'll call a meeting. MC Brothers can scrape together maybe 10 grand between us. Still short 5,000. I've got my retirement savings, 22,000. More than enough to cover it." Sarah's head snapped up. "Dad, no. That's your money? For emergencies. For I'm dying. This is the emergency. What else am I going to spend it on? Your care." "Comfort," Sarah's voice cracked again. "Things that make the next 3 months bearable. Keeping Tommy's grandson alive makes it bearable. Everything else is just waiting." The argument Sarah wanted to make died on her lips because what could she say to that? How did you tell a dying man that his priorities were wrong when his time had already run out? She looked at Daniel for backup, but Daniel was studying their father with an expression Ray couldn't quite read. "Pop," Daniel's voice came out careful like he was approaching a spooked horse. "This kid, Tyler, you don't owe him anything. Tommy died 70 years ago. His debt's been paid 1,000 times over in how you lived your life." Ray's hand went flat on the table. "I owe Tommy everything. Every morning I woke up after April 16th, 1952 was time he bought for me with his body. Every meal I ate, every sunset I saw, every time I held your mother, every moment I spent being your father, Tommy paid for all of it. You want to tell me that debt expires? You want to tell me I shouldn't spend my last 3 months paying back even a fraction of what he gave me?" The kitchen held that for a moment. Then Daniel nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Okay, we saved Tyler. How Victor wants 15,000 in 48 hours. Ray tapped the table. "I withdraw my savings Monday morning when the bank opens. We arrange a meeting. We pay. We make it clear Tyler's debt is settled and Victor leaves him alone. And if Victor decides 15 isn't enough, if he wants interest, if he sees an old man with 22 grand and decides to take it all, then you boys make sure that doesn't happen." Daniel's expression went cold in a way Ray recognized from his own mirror 30 years ago, back when he could still muster that particular brand of controlled aggression. "Pop, if this goes bad, people are going to get hurt. Victor's not some punk. He's connected. Cartel money, probably. You pay him, you're on his radar. He'll come back. Let him. I'll be dead in 3 months. What's he going to do, kill me faster? He could kill Sarah. He could kill Tyler. He could burn down your house with you in it." Ray met his son's eyes. "That's why I need the Iron Brotherhood. That's why I'm asking you to stand with me on this. One last mission. Father and son, keep Victor honest long enough for Tyler to get clean and get gone." Sarah stood again, this time with purpose instead of distress. "I'm calling Mike and Tom. Your other children deserve to know what's happening." Ray raised a hand. "Not yet. Let me do this first. Let me save Tommy's boy. Then we'll have the family meeting where everyone falls apart and I have to comfort people about my own death." "But not yet. Dad, please, honey, give me 48 hours to fix this. Then you can tell the whole family and we'll have the crying and the hospice discussions and all the things that come with dying properly. But right now I need to focus on keeping a 28-year-old kid alive long enough for him to figure out his grandfather was a hero, and maybe that means something." Sarah looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Ray. The silence stretched until Sarah broke it with a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You're the most stubborn man I've ever met. Comes with the territory. Marines don't surrender. We just advance in a different direction. You're not a Marine anymore. You're a dying old man who got slapped by a junkie and is now planning to give your life savings to a drug dealer." "Sounds about right. This is insane." "Probably." Ray stood his joints, protesting. "But it's my kind of insane. You two can help, or you can get out of the way. Either option's fine, but I'm doing this." Daniel stood too. "I'm in. MC will back you. But Pop, we do this smart. No cowboy shit. We plan it out. We make sure everyone walks away. Except me. I don't walk away from anything anymore. 3 months, remember. You know what I mean." Ray did know. He also knew that 48 hours from now, things would probably go sideways in ways none of them anticipated, because that's how plans work perfectly on paper, catastrophically in practice. But Tyler would live. That mattered. That was the only thing that mattered once you stripped away everything else. Sarah grabbed her keys. "I'm going home. I need to think. And cry. And probably drink wine I shouldn't drink on a Saturday afternoon. Call me tomorrow. Tell me the plan. I'll probably hate it, but I'll help anyway because apparently we Sullivans are all stubborn idiots who make terrible decisions for noble reasons. She kissed Ray's forehead, hugged Daniel so hard he grunted, and left through the kitchen door without looking back. Her car started in the driveway, gravel crunching, as she pulled away, the sound fading into afternoon silence. Daniel moved to the window, watching until his sister's taillights disappeared. She's going to tell the others. You know that, right? Let her. They were going to find out eventually. They'll be pissed you waited. They'll get over it. Or they won't. Either way, I won't be around long enough to care. Daniel turned from the window. That's a shitty attitude. It's a realistic attitude. Ray moved to the cabinet, pulled out a bottle of whiskey Martha had bought for special occasions, poured 2 glasses. He handed one to Daniel, to Tommy Chen, who saved my ass 70 years ago and apparently isn't done making demands on my time. They drank. The whiskey burned, going down familiar and harsh, and exactly what Ray needed to cut through the fog of pain medication and adrenaline crash, and the surreal feeling of having told his children he was dying and then immediately pivoting to planning a drug deal payoff. Daniel set his glass down. Tell me about Tommy, the real story, not the sanitized version you gave us as kids. Ray poured another measure, sat down heavily. Tommy Chen was 20 years old, Marine from San Francisco. His parents had been interned during World War II, lost everything, rebuilt from nothing. Tommy joined up in '51 to prove something, probably. Prove he was American enough. Prove his family's loyalty. Prove whatever young men try to prove when they volunteer to go overseas and kill people they've never met. The whiskey disappeared. Ray didn't pour more. We shipped out together, ended up in the same unit. Korea was... Ray paused, searching for words that had never quite fit what he'd experienced. It was cold, colder than anything I'd known. And loud. Artillery coming in sounds like the world ending. You don't get used to it, you just learn to function through it. What happened on Pork Chop Hill, April 16, 1952? Ray's voice flattened out, taking on the tone of someone reciting facts to avoid feeling them. Chinese offensive. They wanted the hill. We were dug in. They had numbers. We had position. Basic math that always ends the same way. Lots of people will die and somebody claims victory and nothing really changes except the names on the casualty reports. And Tommy saved my life. Saved 2 other Marines. Chinese grenade came into our bunker. Tommy didn't hesitate. Just threw himself on it. Died instantly. 3 of us walked away because he didn't. Did he have time to say anything? Ray's hand tightened on his glass. Tell my son I love him. Tell him to be better than me. That was it. Then the grenade went off and Tommy was just gone. Not a person anymore. Just meat and blood in a memory I've carried for 70 years. Jesus, Pop. I tried to find his family after the war. Lily had remarried. New name. New life. Didn't want reminders of the husband who'd died overseas. I understand that. Some people move forward by leaving the past behind. But it meant I never got to tell Robert Chen what his father said. Never got to tell him Tommy died a hero. Never got to repay the debt. Daniel refilled both glasses without asking. And now Robert's son shows up in your diner strung out on meth, owing money to a cartel dealer, and slaps you in the face. Universe has a sense of humor. That's one word for it. They drank in silence for a moment. Through the window, October light painted the yard in colors that wouldn't last much longer. Trees preparing to sleep. Grass going dormant. Everything in Montana shutting down for winter except the things too stubborn to know when to quit. Ray spoke into his whiskey. I need you to do something for me. Name it. When I'm gone, look after Tyler. Make sure he gets clean. Make sure he stays clean. Give him a mature. Give him a purpose. Make him understand what his grandfather was. Pop, promise me, Daniel. Ray's voice carried the weight of 7 decades. This is important. More important than anything else I'll ask you to do. Tommy Chen saved my life so I could save his. I need you to finish it if I can. Daniel set his glass down carefully. I promise. Iron Brotherhood will look after him. We'll get him clean. We'll keep him that way. We'll make sure Tommy's sacrifice meant something. Good. That's good. The kitchen fell quiet again. Ray's body was starting to register everything that had happened, the slap, the adrenaline, the stress of confession, the whiskey hitting pain medication in ways Dr. Morrison would definitely not approve of. His hands shook slightly. His vision blurred at the edges. The cancer was reminding him that it was in charge now that Ray's body was just territory it was occupying until the lease ran out. Daniel noticed, "You need to rest. I'll call the brothers, set up a meeting for tonight. We'll plan this out proper. We're a clubhouse. 7 o'clock. You up for it? I'll be there. Pop, you look like you're about to fall over." "I'll rally." Ray stood using the table for support. "Just need a nap. Come get me at 6:30. Daniel helped his father to the stairs, then up them, the process taking longer than it should have because Ray's legs had apparently decided they were on strike. The bedroom looked the same as it had that morning, neat spare holding the ghost of Martha's presence in ways Ray couldn't quite name. Daniel helped him onto the bed, pulled off his shoes, covered him with the quilt Martha had made 30 years ago. "Get some sleep. I'll handle everything else." Ray's eyes were already closing. "Daniel, yeah, Pop. I'm proud of you. The man you've become. The life you've built. I should have said that 10 years ago. You're saying it now. That's what matters." Ray wanted to say more, but sleep was pulling him under with the inevitability of tide. He heard Daniel's footsteps retreating, the bedroom door closing softly, the house settling into afternoon quiet. His last conscious thought was of Tommy Chen's face, young and whole, and grinning outside a bunker that didn't exist anymore on a hill that had changed hands so many times the blood had soaked in deep enough that nothing would ever grow there again. He dreamed of Korea, but this time Tommy lived. This time the grenade never came. This time they both went home and grew old and raised families and died in their sleep, surrounded by grandchildren. This time the debt never existed because the sacrifice never happened. This time was better. Ray woke to darkness and Daniel's voice calling from downstairs. "Pop, 6:30, time to go." The nap had helped more than he'd expected. The pain was still there, but manageable background noise instead of main event. Ray pulled himself upright, found clean clothes, made himself presentable enough for a motorcycle club meeting. The mirror showed an old man with a split lip and bruising that would get worse before it got better. But the eyes were clear. The spine was straight. The warrior was still in there somewhere under the cancer and age and accumulated damage. Downstairs, Daniel waited with coffee and a sandwich Ray didn't want, but ate anyway because he'd need the calories for whatever came next. They drove in Daniel's truck through Cedar Falls as it transitioned from day to night, streetlights flickering on businesses closing, the town settling into Saturday evening routines that had repeated for decades. The Iron Brotherhood Clubhouse sat on 5 acres outside town, a converted warehouse that had once manufactured agricultural equipment and now served as headquarters for 8 veterans who'd found brotherhood outside the military. Daniel parked in the gravel lot where a dozen motorcycles sat in precise rose chrome, catching light from the building's windows. Inside the clubhouse was exactly what Ray expected: part garage, part bar, part meeting hall. Motorcycles in various states of repair occupied one corner. A full bar ran along one wall, bottles arranged with military precision, tables and chairs scattered throughout, all mismatched but clean. Walls covered with photographs of members past and present, military unit patches, American flags, the detritus of lives spent serving and then figuring out what came after. The brothers were already there. Daniel had called them and they'd come because that's what brothers did. Ray counted 8 men ranging from late 40s to mid-60s, all veterans, all carrying the particular bearing that came from military service. They stood when Ray entered, a gesture of respect he hadn't expected and didn't quite know how to accept. Daniel made introductions, though Ray knew most of them already from Sarah's updates and occasional encounters around town. Sergeant, real name, Marcus Williams, Vietnam veteran, 62 face, carrying scars from burns sustained pulling wounded from a helicopter crash. Preacher James Morrison, Gulf War 55, ordained minister who'd found God after finding too many IEDs. Wrench David Chen, Iraq War. 48 mechanical genius who could rebuild engines blindfolded. Bear Thomas Yazzie, 54 Navajo, Afghanistan veteran. Massive frame hiding a gentle soul. 4 others whose names Ray tried to catalog and immediately forgot because his brain was starting to prioritize, and names of people he just met didn't make the cut. Daniel addressed the group with the authority of someone they'd elected to lead. "Everyone knows why we're here. My father needs help. I'm asking the Brotherhood to provide it." Sergeant spoke first, his voice carrying the rasp of someone who'd inhaled too much smoke. "Doc, your father's a Marine. Korean War. That makes him family by default." "What does he need?" Ray stepped forward, not wanting Daniel to have to speak for him. "There's a kid. 28, meth addict, owes $15,000 to a dealer named Victor Reyes. Victor threatened to kill him, kill me, burn down Crystal's diner. I'm paying the debt. I need backup to make sure Victor takes the money and walks away. Preacher leaned back in his chair. Victor Reyes, I know that name. Connected to Sinaloa pipeline. Not someone you want to cross. Not planning to cross him. Planning to pay him and be done with it. Wrench spoke up. Why, what's this kid to you? His grandfather saved my life in Korea. Threw himself on a grenade. I've been carrying that debt for 70 years. Time to pay it. The brothers exchanged glances, some kind of nonverbal communication Ray couldn't quite read. Then Sergeant nodded when and where Monday morning. I'm withdrawing $22,000 from my bank. We arrange a meeting with Victor. We pay. We make it clear the debt is settled and he leaves the kid alone. And if Victor gets greedy, Bear's voice was surprisingly soft for a man his size. Then you boys remind him why messing with Marines is bad for business. That got a few tight smiles. Daniel pulled out his phone. I'll reach out to Victor through channels. Set up the meet for Monday afternoon. Neutral ground, public place. Somewhere he feels safe enough to deal but exposed enough that he won't try anything stupid. Crystal's Diner, Ray said. Where this started is where it ends. Daniel frowned. Pop, that puts Betty and Linda at risk. Betty's a Marine widow. She'll understand. And having it in the diner means witnesses. Means Victor has to play it straight. Sergeant nodded slowly. Bold move. I like it. Shows we're not afraid of him. We're not. Ray's voice carried conviction he mostly felt. Victor's a businessman. He wants his money. We give him his money. He goes away. Simple transaction. Nothing simple with cartel money. Preacher stood, moved to the bar, poured himself water. But you're right, that public location keeps him honest. Question is what happens after Victor walks away. But the kid's still an addict. Still has whatever problems led to him owing 15 grand in the first place. That's where you boys come in. Ray looked around the room at 8 men who'd all fought their own demons and survived. Tyler needs structure, purpose, brotherhood. He needs what you've built here. You want us to prospect a meth addict who slapped you? Wrench's tone was skeptical but not hostile. I want you to save Tommy Chen's grandson from the same system that failed Victor Reyes' father. I want you to break the cycle. I want you to give Tyler a reason to get clean and stay clean. Daniel added, Pop's dying. Stage 4 cancer. 3 months. This is his last mission. He's asking us to finish it after he's gone. That changed the room's energy. Ray felt it shift, saw the way the brothers looked at him with new understanding. Dying men got latitude. Dying Marines got even more. Sergeant spoke for the group. We'll back you Monday. We'll prospect Tyler if he's serious about getting clean. We'll honor Tommy Chen's sacrifice by making sure his grandson doesn't waste his life. That's the best we can offer. That's all I'm asking. The meeting continued for another hour, planning details that Ray mostly let Daniel handle. Where to position people. How to coordinate with Sheriff Braddock. What to do if Victor brought more men than expected. Contingency plans for contingencies that bred more contingencies. The tactical side of ensuring a simple money handoff didn't turn into a bloodbath. Ray's attention drifted. The clubhouse walls held photographs of members, some alive, some dead, all connected by service and sacrifice. He recognized the pattern because he'd lived it, young men going to war. Coming home changed, finding each other because civilian life didn't quite fit anymore. Building families from broken pieces. Creating meaning from chaos. Tommy Chen should have had this. Should have come home, gotten old, found brotherhood among other Marines who understood. Instead, he died at 20 and left a family that didn't know how to mourn him properly, a son who'd grown up without a father, a grandson who'd inherited trauma he didn't have words for. Ray was pulled from his thoughts by Daniel's hand on his shoulder. Pop, you okay? Just tired. What's the plan? Monday 9 a.m. you withdraw the K. 10 a.m. we meet here and go over final details. Noon Victor meets us at Crystal's. We pay, we leave. Brotherhood maintains presence until we're sure Tyler's safe. And Tyler and I'll talk to him tomorrow. Explain what's happening. Make sure he understands this is his one chance. Good. That's good. The meeting broke up around 8:30. Brothers dispersed to homes and families and Saturday evening plans that had been interrupted for this. Daniel drove Ray home through darkness, neither man talking much. The day had been long and strange and exhausting in ways that went beyond physical. At Ray's house, Daniel killed the engine but didn't move to leave Pop about that letter. Yeah, thank you for writing it, for keeping it, for giving it to me today. Should have given it to you 10 years ago. Maybe, but you gave it to me when I needed it most. That counts. Ray nodded, too tired to process the forgiveness Daniel was offering. He climbed out of the truck, made his way to the front door, turned back to see Daniel still sitting there. Get home, son. Tell your kids you love them. Don't wait 10 years like I did. I will, Pop. I will. The truck's taillights disappeared down the driveway. Ray went inside to a house that felt emptier than it had that morning, despite nothing physical having changed. He climbed stairs that seemed steeper, found his bedroom that seemed smaller, lay down on a bed that seemed less comfortable than it used to be. His phone buzzed. Text from Sarah. I told Mike and Tom. They're calling you tomorrow. I'm sorry, but they needed to know. Ray typed back, it's fine, expected. Love you. Love you too, Dad. Please don't die before Monday. I need to see you save that kid. I'll try my best. He set the phone aside and stared at the ceiling, where shadows moved in patterns that meant nothing and everything. 40 hours until the money handoff, 90 days until the cancer finished its work. Somewhere between those two deadlines, Ray Sullivan would figure out how to keep Tommy Chen's grandson alive and maybe find peace with the fact that 70 years of carrying guilt was finally coming to an end. Sleep came slowly, bringing dreams of bunkers and grenades and young men who never got old. But this time when Tommy Chen died, Ray didn't wake up screaming. This time he woke up calm, knowing that Monday was coming, and with it, the chance to finally settle a debt that had accumulated interest for 7 decades. Sunday morning arrived with the particular quality of light that comes before storms, the sky heavy with clouds that hadn't decided whether to release their burden or hold it another day. Ray woke at 5 too early, but also too late to go back to sleep. His body ached in ways that made getting out of bed a negotiation with muscles that had forgotten their purpose. The house was quiet. The world was quiet. Cedar Falls on Sunday morning existed in that space between Saturday night's revelry and Monday morning's responsibilities. Everyone sleeping in or attending church or pretending that time wasn't passing as fast as it actually was. Ray made coffee, took his pills, sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper he didn't read. His phone showed 3 missed calls. Mike, Tom, probably Sarah again. He'd call them back later. Right now he needed to think about Tyler Brennan, about where the kid was, about how to make sure he showed up Monday to witness his debt being paid. The answer came from Daniel's text at 7 a.m. Found Tyler. He's at the Riverside Motel room 12, told him you wanted to talk. He'll be there until noon. Ray finished his coffee, dressed in clean clothes, drove through Cedar Falls, past churches, where people who believed in salvation gathered to sing about it. The Riverside Motel occupied a stretch of highway that had once been the main route through town, and now was just the place where people stayed when they couldn't afford anywhere better. 12 rooms, old ground floor, all facing a parking lot where Tyler's rusted truck sat next to 3 other vehicles that had seen better decades. Room 12's door was cracked open. Ray knocked anyway, then pushed through into a space that smelled like cigarettes and desperation and the particular funk of someone who'd stopped caring about hygiene because caring about anything required energy meth had stolen. Tyler sat on the bed's edge, looking worse than he had yesterday. Withdrawal was setting in, sweating despite the cool air, shaking hands, eyes that couldn't quite focus. He looked up when Ray entered, his face cycling through shame and confusion and fear. Mr. Sullivan, I didn't think you'd actually come. Ray pulled the room's only chair away from the desk, sat down facing Tyler. Your grandfather was named Tommy Chen. He was a Marine. He died in Korea, saving my life and 2 other men. He was 20 years old. He had a wife and a son he never got to meet. That son was your father, Robert. Tyler's face worked through emotions. How do you know about my dad? You told me yesterday, Robert Chen, Vietnam. I never got to meet him, but I looked for him after the war. Your grandmother remarried, changed names. I lost track. My dad never talked about his father. Said it hurt too much. Probably did. Growing up without a father because he died being a hero. That's a heavy thing to carry. Is that why you're here, to tell me about Grandpa? I'm here to tell you that tomorrow I'm paying your debt to Victor Reyes, $15,000. You'll be free and clear. Tyler's face showed disbelief. Why would you do that? I hit you. I was an asshole. I deserve whatever Victor does to me. You probably do, but your grandfather didn't deserve to die at 20. Your father didn't deserve to grow up without him. And I didn't deserve to live 70 extra years while Tommy's family fell apart. So I'm paying the debt. Call it interest on what I owe your grandfather. I don't understand. Ray leaned forward. Tommy Chen threw himself on a grenade to save 3 men. One of those men was me. I've spent 70 years trying to figure out how to repay that. You're my answer. I save you. I get Tommy's grandson clean. I make sure his sacrifice meant something, beyond just keeping one 19-year-old Marine alive long enough to become a stubborn old man. Tyler's eyes filled with tears. I'm not worth saving, Mr. Sullivan. I'm just a junkie who fucked up his life. My dad would be ashamed, and my grandpa would be ashamed. They'd want you to get better. That's what I want too. Tomorrow after I pay Victor, you're going into rehab. Daniel's arranging it. VA facility in Billings. 90 days, maybe longer if you need it. Iron Brotherhood will cover the cost. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm telling. This is what happens. You get clean. You stay clean. You become the man Tommy Chen would have wanted his grandson to be. That's how you honor him. Tyler wiped his face with shaking hands. What if I can't? What if I relapse? Then you get up and try again. That's what warriors do. They keep fighting even when the fight seems impossible. I'm not a warrior. I'm nobody. You're Tommy Chen's blood. Ray stood his knees protesting. That makes you somebody. Tomorrow noon, Crystal's Diner. Be there. Watch me pay your debt. Then start paying your own debt to your grandfather by getting your life together. He walked to the door, paused Tyler. Your grandfather's last words were, tell my son I love him. Tell him to be better than me. I never got to deliver that message to your father, but I'm delivering it to you now. Be better. That's all Tommy asked. Ray left before Tyler could respond, climbing back into his truck with joints that hurt and a heart that hurt differently. He'd done what he could. The rest was up to Tyler and time, and whatever combination of will and luck determined whether broken people got put back together or just stayed broken. The rest of Sunday passed in phone calls Ray didn't want to have. Mike and Tom, his other children, both upset he'd kept the cancer secret, both insisting on coming home immediately, both making promises about being there that Ray knew life would complicate. He let them talk, made appropriate sounds, and felt the weight of being the center of a tragedy that was still unfolding. Sarah came by in the afternoon with groceries and determination. You're not eating enough. You look like a skeleton. Cancer'll do that. Don't joke. This isn't funny. Never said it was. She made him dinner roast chicken and vegetables he picked at while she talked about her daughters and her job and anything except the fact that her father was dying. Ray let her talk because it was easier than the silence. When she left at 8, the house felt emptier than before she'd arrived. Ray went to bed early knowing Monday would require strength he wasn't sure he still had. The pills helped him sleep but didn't stop the dreams. Korea again, Tommy again, the grenade again. But this time when Ray woke at 3 a.m., he didn't feel fear. He felt ready. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. Ray was up at 5, showered and dressed in his best clothes slacks and a button-down shirt and the Korean War veteran jacket he wore like armor. He made coffee, took pills, sat at the kitchen table, watching sunrise paint the mountains in colors that would be gone in an hour. At 8:30, Daniel arrived to drive him to the bank. They didn't talk much during the short trip. Ray had rehearsed what he'd tell the bank manager about withdrawing $22,000 in cash emergency expense, personal business, none of your concern. The manager, a woman Ray had known for 15 years, asked if everything was okay and accepted his non-answer with professional courtesy. The money came in hundreds wrapped in bank bands, feeling heavier than Ray expected. $22,000. Martha's life insurance payout invested carefully. 40 years of postal work compressed into a stack of paper. The sum total of Ray Sullivan's financial existence about to be handed to a drug dealer to save a kid who had slapped him in the face. Daniel drove them to the clubhouse where the Brotherhood waited. 10 o'clock meeting, final plans, everyone understanding their role. Ray would sit in the center booth at Crystal's with the money. Daniel and 4 brothers would be positioned throughout the diner, visible, but not threatening. Sergeant and 3 others would stay outside backup if things went wrong. Sheriff Braddock had been notified and wasn't happy, but agreed to stay clear unless called. At 11:30, they drove to Crystal's in a convoy of trucks and motorcycles. Betty had closed the diner to regular customers, just her and Linda present. She greeted Ray with coffee and worry. This is crazy, Ray. Probably. But it's my crazy. Victor's not a good man. Neither was I once upon a time. We all make choices. The Brotherhood positioned themselves. Ray took his booth with the money in a canvas bag on the seat beside him. Linda poured coffee he didn't drink. Betty stood behind the register with her phone. The clock above the counter ticked toward noon with the inevitability of gravity. At exactly noon, Victor Reyes walked through the door alone. No enforcers, no backup, just him and the confidence of a man who knew he held all the cards. He spotted Ray, smiled without warmth, and walked over to Old Man. "You got my money right here." Ray gestured to the canvas bag. 15,000, count it if you want. Victor sat down across from him, pulled the bag over, rifled through the stacks of bill with practiced efficiency. "This is more than 15. 22. Call it insurance that you leave Tyler alone after today." Victor's eyes narrowed. "You're paying me to forget about him. I'm paying you to consider his debt settled. Permanently. No interest, no future calls, no threats. We're done. And if I say no, if I say I want 50, then these gentlemen around the diner will explain why that's a bad idea." Ray's voice stayed calm. "But you're a businessman, Victor. You have got your money, more than owed. Walking away makes sense." Victor looked around at the Iron Brotherhood positioned throughout Crystal's assessed odds, did math Ray couldn't see. "You got balls, viejo. Dying man, playing tough guy, not playing, just finishing business before I run out of time." Victor leaned back, the money still in his hands. "My father used to tell me stories about honor, about warriors taking care of their own, about debts that lasted beyond death. I never believed him. Thought it was old man talk. Nostalgic bullshit from someone who couldn't let go of the past." Ray waited. "But you..." Victor shook his head. "You're doing exactly what he would have done. Protecting someone who doesn't deserve it because you made a promise to a dead man 70 years ago. That's either the most noble thing I've ever seen or the stupidest. Can be both." "Yeah." Victor stood, took the money. "Tyler's debt is settled. He steps 1 foot back in my business, all bets are off. But as of now, we're square. One more thing." Ray pulled an envelope from his jacket. "Inside are the details of Tommy Chen's Medal of Honor. His grandson should know his grandfather died a hero. Make sure Tyler gets it." Victor took the envelope, looked inside his face, showing something that might have been "Respect Tommy Chen. Pork Chop Hill. I've read about that battle. Your friend was a badass. He was. And his grandson can be too if someone gives him a chance. That someone's not going to be me, I know. But you won't stop others from trying. That's all I'm asking." Victor nodded, once turned toward the door. "Pause, viejo. What you did here, my father would have approved, for what it's worth." Then he was gone, walking out of Crystal's diner with $22,000 and whatever small piece of redemption Ray had managed to carve out of a bad situation. The diner exhaled collectively. Daniel moved to Ray's booth. "That went better than expected. He's still a drug dealer." "Yeah, but today he was a drug dealer with honor. That's something." Ray slumped back in the booth, energy draining out now that the confrontation was over. "Where's Tyler?" "Outside. Watching. Probably scared shitless." "Bring him in." Daniel stepped outside, returned a minute later with Tyler in tow. The kid looked worse than yesterday, withdrawal and fear and disbelief warring across his face. He slid into the booth across from Ray. "You really paid my debt." "I did." "Why? I told you why. Your grandfather. The debt I owe. That doesn't make sense. Nobody does this. Nobody just helps." Ray's voice came out tired but certain. "Tommy Chen did. He helped 3 strangers by dying for them. I'm helping his grandson by keeping him alive. That's how honor works. It passes forward, generation to generation, as long as someone remembers what it means." Tyler's face crumpled, tears flowing freely. "Now I don't deserve this. Probably not. But Tommy deserved to see his grandson become a man, and I'm going to make sure that happens, even if I won't be around to see it myself." Daniel put a hand on Tyler's shoulder. "Rehab starts tomorrow. Billings VA facility, 90 days minimum. Brotherhood will check on you. When you get out, you've got a book and a place with us. But Tyler, this is your one chance. You blow it, you're on your own." "I won't blow it." Tyler wiped his face. "I swear, I'll get clean. I'll stay clean. I'll make my grandfather proud." Ray stood slowly, his body reminding him that stress and cancer were a bad combination. "Good. That's what I needed to hear." He walked toward the diner's exit, each a step requiring conscious effort. Behind him, he heard Tyler asking Daniel questions about rehab, about the brotherhood, about what came next. In front of him, he saw October sunlight in a town he'd lived in for 81 years and approximately 89 days remaining before none of it mattered anymore. Daniel caught up to him in the parking lot. "Pop, you did good today. We'll see. Kid's got a long road ahead, but you gave him a chance." That's what Tommy would have wanted. Ray nodded, too tired to speak. Daniel drove him home through familiar streets that suddenly felt like they belonged to someone else's life. At the house, Ray climbed out of the truck and, with Daniel's help, made it to the porch before his legs gave out completely. Daniel caught him. "Pop, you're done. You need to rest. Just need a minute." But it wasn't a minute. It was Ray's body finally presenting the bill for everything he'd spent over the last 3 days. The cancer, sensing weakness, pressed its advantage. Ray's vision grayed at the edges. His breathing came shallow and painful. His heart hammered irregularly. Daniel got him inside onto the couch, called Sarah and 911 in that order. Ray tried to protest but couldn't find breath for words. The room spun. The ceiling disappeared. Somewhere far away, he heard sirens approaching, heard voices saying things about blood pressure and heart rate, and hospital heard Daniel saying, "Stay with me. Pop, just stay with me." Ray's last conscious thought before everything went dark was simple. "Tommy, I kept my promise. Your boy is safe. We're square now." Then the darkness took him, and he fell into it gratefully. The ambulance arrived within minutes, but time had stopped, meaning anything to Ray Sullivan. He floated in and out of consciousness, aware of hands touching him, voices discussing his vitals in medical terminology that washed over him like static. The ride to Cedar Falls Medical Center passed in fragments. Sirens, Daniel's face above him tight with fear. The ceiling of the ambulance bay sliding past as they wheeled him through automatic doors. Dr. Morrison materialized in the emergency room with the grim expression of someone who'd predicted this exact scenario and taken no pleasure in being right. He examined Ray with efficient hands while asking Daniel questions about what happened, when it started, what medications Ray had taken that morning. The answers painted a picture Ray could have drawn himself, dying. Man pushed his body past breaking point. Body decided to collect payment immediately rather than waiting the scheduled 3 months. They admitted him overnight for observation, hooked him to monitors that beeped rhythms of a heart that had logged 81 years and was signaling it might not make 82. Sarah arrived within an hour, her face showing the particular devastation of watching a parent transition from invincible to mortal in real time. She held Ray's hand and cried quietly while Daniel stood at the window looking out at mountains that didn't care about human drama playing out in their shadow. Ray drifted in medicated haze, aware of his children's presence, but unable to summon energy for conversation. His body had spent everything it had on Monday's mission and now demanded rest that might slide into something more permanent if he wasn't careful. The monitors beeped their mechanical concern. Nurses came and went with professional sympathy. Night fell outside windows Ray couldn't quite focus on. Somewhere in the dark hours, he woke to find Daniel asleep in the chair beside the bed, his son's face younger in sleep, less burdened by the weight of watching a father die. Ray studied him and felt a particular ache of knowing this relationship, fraught and difficult and finally healing, would end before they'd fully repaired 10 years of damage. 3 months had seemed like enough time when it was abstract. Now hooked to machines counting down heartbeats, 3 months felt impossibly optimistic. Morning arrived with Dr. Morrison and test results that confirmed what everyone already knew. The stress of Monday's confrontation had accelerated. The cancer's timeline compromised Ray's already failing heart and moved his prognosis from months to weeks if he was lucky, days if he wasn't. The doctor delivered this news with clinical precision, softened by genuine compassion, then asked if Ray wanted to discuss hospice care, pain management protocols, end-of-life arrangements that made death sound like an administrative process requiring proper paperwork. Ray listened and nodded at appropriate moments while his attention drifted to the window where October light painted everything gold. He'd lived 81 years, served his country, married a good woman, raised 4 children who mostly turned out okay, saved Tommy Chen's grandson from a debt that would have killed him. The ledger was balanced. Anything else was bonus time. They released him Tuesday afternoon with enough pain medication to kill a horse and instructions he knew he wouldn't follow about rest and hydration and monitoring symptoms that were just different words for dying slowly. Daniel drove him home through Cedar Falls, looking changed familiar, streets rendered foreign by the lens of imminent mortality. The hardware store where Ray had bought his first hammer. The bank where he'd withdrawn his life savings 2 days ago. Crystal's diner where everything had started and somehow ended in the space of 72 hours. The house felt different too. No longer a place he lived, but a place he was leaving. Daniel helped him inside, got him settled on the couch, made tea Ray didn't want. They sat in silence for a while, father and son running out of time and words simultaneously. Sarah arrived an hour later with groceries and determination to cook meals Ray wouldn't eat. She bustled around the kitchen with the aggressive competence of someone who'd decided that if she just acted normal, reality might take the hint and follow suit. Daniel watched her with the weary recognition of someone who'd seen this particular grief response before, and knew it didn't help but couldn't be argued with. Ray dozed on the couch while his children moved through his house, making domesticity noises that felt like a stage play about normal family life. He woke to find them both sitting nearby Sarah on the armchair and Daniel on the floor with his back against the wall, both watching him with identical expressions of helpless sorrow. "We should talk," Ray said, his voice rougher than he'd expected. Sarah wiped her eyes. About what? About what happens next? About arrangements? About the things people discuss when they're teens and everyone's pretending they're not. "Dad," Sarah's voice broke. "Honey, I'm dying. We all know it. Pretending otherwise just wastes time I don't have to waste. So let's talk about it like adults." Daniel shifted position. "What do you want, Pop, for the funeral? For after? Keep it simple. Military honors if the Marines still do that for Korean War veterans. Bury me next to your mother. No fuss, no big production, just family and whoever shows up from town." "Mike and Tom should be here." Sarah pulled out her phone. "They're flying in tomorrow. They wanted to come today, but tomorrow's fine." Ray closed his eyes. "Gives me time to prepare what I want to say." "What do you want to say? That I'm sorry I wasn't a better father. That I'm proud of all of you. That your mother was the best thing that ever happened to me, and I wasted too many years after she died just existing instead of living. The usual regrets dying people have when they realize time's up." "You were a good father," Daniel said quietly. "I was an adequate father who did his best and still screwed up plenty. Let's not rewrite history just because I'm dying." Sarah made a sound between laugh and sob. "You're such an asshole sometimes. Learn from the best. Mom was a saint. I meant my drill sergeant." That got weak smiles. They sat together in afternoon light that felt precious because everything felt precious now that Ray's internal clock was counting down in days instead of decades. Outside, Cedar Falls continued its Tuesday routine, unaware and unconcerned that Raymond Sullivan's story was entering final chapters. The doorbell rang. Daniel stood to answer it, returning a moment later, with Tyler Brennan looking cleaned up and terrified. The kid stood in the doorway like he wasn't sure he had permission to enter, his hands shaking slightly from withdrawal that was still working through his system. "Mr. Sullivan, Tyler's voice cracked. "I heard you were in the hospital. I wanted to check if you were okay." "Still alive." "Barely, but alive." Tyler stepped further into the room, his eyes taking in Ray on the couch with blankets and medication bottles and the general appearance of someone who'd started the process of checking out. "It's my fault. The stress of paying my debt, it made you sick. I was already sick. You just accelerated the timeline. Don't flatter yourself. I'm so sorry. For everything, for hitting you, for causing all this. For Tyler." Ray's voice cut through the spiral. "You apologized. I accepted. We're done with that. What I need to know is whether you're keeping your promises. Rehab starts tomorrow. Billings VA facility. 90 days I'm going. I swear I'm going." "Good. Daniel will drive you. Brotherhood will check on you. When you get out, you've got a job waiting. But Tyler, this is your last chance. You understand that I understand." Tyler wiped his face. "I won't let you down. I won't let my grandfather down. Your grandfather would be proud. You're trying. That's all any of us can do. Try." Tyler nodded, looked like he wanted to say more, settled for "thank you. For everything, for saving my life. Thank your grandfather. He's the one who saved mine first." After Tyler left, Sarah made dinner that Ray picked at while his children watched with the careful attention of people cataloging moments they'd want to remember later. They talked about nothing important, whether Sarah's students, Daniel's construction projects, The kind of conversational filler that let everyone pretend this was normal evening instead of what it actually was dress rehearsal for goodbye. Mike and Tom arrived Wednesday afternoon. Ray's other children carrying their own versions of grief and guilt and the complicated emotions that come from relationships that were fine but never quite deep. They'd lived their own lives in other states, called on holidays, visited occasionally, maintained the fiction that geographic distance didn't equal emotional distance. Now, facing their father's imminent death, they were confronted with the reality that you can't make up for decades of casual neglect in a handful of days. Ray gathered all four children in the living room Wednesday evening, positioned himself in his armchair like a dying king preparing final pronouncements. They sat around him in various states of emotional distress, waiting for wisdom or absolution or whatever dying fathers were supposed to provide. "I'm not good at this," Ray started, the big speech thing. "Your mother was better with words, but I need to say some things before I run out of time to say them." Four faces watched him, identical in their grief, if nothing else. "I wasn't always a good father. I was hard on you. Expected too much sometimes. Showed affection like it cost money I didn't have. Made you feel like love had to be earned instead of just given. That was wrong. That was me bringing the military home and forgetting that children aren't soldiers who need discipline. They're just kids who need to know they're loved." Sarah was crying. Mike looked at the floor. Tom wiped his eyes. Daniel's jaw was tight. "But I want you to know that every harsh word, every impossible expectation, every time I pushed too hard or held back too much, it came from love. Messed up love, maybe. Love filtered through my own damage and fear, and the particular kind of emotional constipation that men of my generation wear like armor. But love, nonetheless." He paused, gathering strength. "Mike, Tom, I'm sorry I wasn't around more when you were growing up. Working two jobs meant missing your games and recitals and the small moments that mattered. I thought providing was the same as parenting. I was wrong." Mike's voice came out thick. "You did what you had to do, Dad. Maybe. But I wish I'd done more than just what I had to do. I wish I'd done what you deserved. To Sarah, honey, you got stuck being the emotional center of this family after your mother died. That wasn't fair. You were just a kid, and I made you the mediator, the peacekeeper, the one who held everyone together because I couldn't. I'm sorry for that burden." Sarah couldn't speak, just shook her head while tears fell. "To Daniel's son, I've already said my piece to you, but I'll say it again in front of your siblings. I was wrong about the Army, wrong about the motorcycle club, wrong about judging your choices instead of trusting you to make them. You're a better man than I ever was. I see that now. I should have seen it 10 years ago." Daniel's voice was barely audible. "Thanks, Pop." Ray looked at all four of them. "Your mother was the best thing I ever did. You four are the second best. Everything else is just noise. When I'm gone, take care of each other. Don't wait 10 years to heal the wounds like I did with Daniel. Don't let pride or stubbornness or geographical distance turn you into strangers. Life's too short. I'm learning that the hard way." The room held that for a moment, weighted with finality. Then Ray added, "Also, I want to be cremated, not buried. Changed my mind about that. Scatter my ashes on Pork Chop Hill, if you can manage it. If not, somewhere in Montana with a view. I've spent enough time in boxes." Sarah laughed through tears. "You just said you wanted to be buried next to Mom." "Changed my mind. Dying man's privilege." The evening dissolved into the kind of chaotic family gathering that Ray had avoided for years. Too many people in too small a space. Conversations overlapping, laughter mixed with tears, the messiness of human connection that he'd always found uncomfortable. But tonight it felt right. Tonight it felt like the way things were supposed to be before death came to collect. Thursday brought Sheriff Braddock to the House official business, mixed with personal concern. He sat across from Ray in the living room, hat in hands, looking uncomfortable. "Ray, I need your statement about Monday. What happened at the diner?" "For the record, Victor Reyes came to collect a debt. I paid it. He left. That's all. $22,000 to a known drug dealer. Ray, that's between me and my bank account. No laws broken. Money was mine to spend however I wanted." Braddock sighed. "You're not making this easy. Tom, I'm dying. I don't have energy to make anything easy. Victor got his money. Tyler's going to rehab. Everybody walks away. That's a better outcome than most situations involving meth addicts and cartel dealers. I suppose it is. Braddock put his hat back on. For what it's worth, what you did for that kid Tommy Chen's grandson, that was a good thing. People in town are talking about it. You're a bit of a hero. I'm a dying old man who paid money to keep someone alive. That's not heroism. That's just math. Call it what you want. Still a good thing. After the sheriff left, Ray allowed himself to feel the exhaustion that had been building for days. His body was shutting down in increments, systems failing in order of importance, pain becoming the background noise of existence. Dr. Morrison had called that morning with offers of hospitalization hospice care interventions that would buy days or weeks at the cost of dignity. Ray had declined all of it. He'd die at home in his own bed, surrounded by family if timing worked out, and alone if it didn't. Either way was fine. Friday morning brought a surprise visitor. Victor Reyes knocked on Ray's door at 9 a.m. alone and looking uncomfortable in a way that suggested this wasn't a social call he'd made before. Daniel answered, body language immediately defensive, but Ray waved him off. Let him in. Victor entered Ray's living room like he was walking into enemy territory, eyes scanning for threats, hands visible to show he wasn't armed. He stood near the door until Ray gestured to a chair. Sit down. You're making me nervous, hovering there. Victor sat. I heard you were in the hospital. Wanted to check if you were okay. Define okay. I'm dying of cancer. But I'm not dead yet, if that's what you're asking. Your son told people what you did. Paying Tyler's debt. Saving his life. Word got around. Small town. Word always gets around. Victor leaned forward. I want you to know something. My father, Victor Sr., he died alone. VA hospital. Nobody there except me. And I was 22 and angry and didn't know how to say goodbye. He died thinking I'd amount to nothing, thinking his service meant nothing because the country he fought for threw him away like garbage. Ray listened without interrupting. What you did Monday, paying that debt for a kid who didn't deserve it, standing up to me because you'd made a promise 70 years ago, my father would have done the same thing, would have respected it. And I disrespected you by showing up with guns and threats. I'm apologizing for that now. The apology hung in the air between them, unexpected and genuine. Ray studied Victor's face, seeing past the drug dealer exterior to the Marine's son underneath the boy who'd watched his father die, broken and decided the world was cruel, so he'd be crueler. Your father was a good Marine. The system failed him. That's not his fault, and it's not yours. But I became what I became. You can become something else. It's not too late. I'm 40 years old. I've done things. Victor's voice caught. There's no coming back from some things. Tommy Chen was 20 when he died. Didn't get the chance to become anything else. Your father was, 60 when he passed, still young enough to have made changes if the system had supported him. You're 40. You've got time Tyler doesn't have, time my father didn't have. Question is whether you'll use it. Victor stood. I'm leaving town, taking my business elsewhere. Cedar Falls is too small. Too many people who remember Victor Sr. Too many people who know what I became. Probably wise. And Tyler, if he gets clean, if he makes something of himself, tell him his debt really is settled. Tell him I said his grandfather would be proud he's trying. I'll tell him. Victor moved to the door, paused, Viejo. What happens after we die? You believe in heaven. Hell, anything. Ray thought about that. I believe warriors go somewhere they can rest. Somewhere the war is over and the wounds don't hurt anymore. Whether that's heaven or just nothing, I don't know. But I hope it's real. I hope so too, because I'd like to see my father again. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I understand now what he was trying to teach me about honor. Then be the man who deserves that reunion. You've got time. Use it. Victor left without another word. Daniel came into the living room looking perplexed. Did that really just happen? Did a drug dealer just apologize to you? World's full of surprises right up until it's not. The weekend passed in a blur of visitors and phone calls, and Ray's body steadily surrendering to the cancer that had finally grown impatient with his stubborn refusal to die on schedule. Saturday brought Betty and Linda from the diner with food and stories about how the town was talking about Ray's showdown with Victor, how he'd become a legend in his own time, how people were saying Raymond Sullivan had reminded Cedar Falls what real courage looked like. Sunday brought the motorcycle club brothers, all 8 of them, filing into Ray's house, like an honor guard bringing news that Tyler had checked into rehab and was already struggling, but committed to staying. Sergeant spoke for the group. We'll watch over him. Make sure he completes the program. Give him a place in the Brotherhood when he's clean. That's our promise to you and to Tommy Chen. Ray thanked them with words that came out weaker than he intended, his voice starting to fail along with everything else. The brothers left quietly, understanding that energy was currency Ray couldn't afford to spend anymore. Monday morning arrived with Ray barely able to get out of bed. Dr. Morrison came to the house, examined him with gentle efficiency, and pulled Daniel aside for a conversation Ray couldn't hear but could guess at days now, not weeks. Make him comfortable, say your goodbyes, the end is coming fast. His 4 children gathered that afternoon, camping out in the living room like they had when they were young, and Martha was still alive and the house felt full instead of empty. They took turns sitting with Ray, keeping him company, sharing memories that may or may not have happened the way anyone remembered. Time was funny that way. The closer you got to the end, the more the past became fluid stories, shifting to fit the narrative everyone needed. Tuesday brought more pain than Ray's medication could handle. His body was shutting down system by system, organs giving up one by one. Dr. Morrison increased the morphine, warned that higher doses would make Ray drowsy, less coherent, but would manage the pain. Ray agreed because dignity was fine, but suffering served no purpose. Wednesday, he barely woke, floating in a medicated haze where past and present blurred together. Korea felt closer than Montana. Tommy Chen's voice sounded clearer than his children's. Martha appeared at the foot of his bed, young and smiling, saying it was almost time, saying she'd been waiting, saying it was okay to stop fighting now. Thursday morning, Daniel's phone rang at 6 a.m. Tyler's voice came through, shaky but determined. I wanted you to know I made it through first week of rehab. It's hell, but I'm doing it. Can I talk to Mr. Sullivan? Tell him I'm keeping my promise. Daniel looked at his father, unconscious in the bed. They'd moved downstairs when stairs became impossible. Pop, Tyler's on the phone. He's in rehab. He's doing it. Ray's eyes opened, barely focused. Daniel put the phone on speaker. Tyler, he can hear you. Tyler's voice cracked. Mr. Sullivan, I'm 1 week sober, 7 days. That's longer than I've been clean in 2 years. I'm doing this for my grandfather, for you, for myself. I'm going to make you proud. Ray's hand moved weakly. Daniel took it, held it while his father tried to speak, managed only. Good, that's good. Tyler was crying on the other end. Thank you for saving me, for believing I was worth saving. I won't let you down. I swear I won't let you down. The call ended. Ray's eyes closed again. Daniel sat holding his father's hand while morning light crept across the floor, marking time that was running out. Friday afternoon brought a moment of clarity. Ray woke more alert than he'd been in days, looked around at his children gathered close, and spoke with surprising strength. I'm ready. It's okay. I did what I needed to do. Tommy's grandson is safe. You kids are going to be fine. I'm ready to go be with your mother. Sarah clutched his hand. Dad, please, not yet. Honey, it's time. You all know it's time. Mike and Tom were crying. Daniel's face was stone, trying not to crack. Sarah couldn't stop shaking her head like denial would stop what was coming. Ray's breathing was labored, but his voice stayed clear. Don't be sad. I had a good life, better than I deserved. I got to see Tommy Chen's grandson start the path to being a man. That's enough. That's more than enough. He closed his eyes, then opened them one more time. Tell Tyler his grandfather would be proud. Tell him the debt is paid. Tell him to live well. Then Raymond Sullivan let go. The warrior who'd survived Korea and decades of guilt and cancer that should have killed him months ago finally stopped fighting. His breathing slowed, steadied, stopped. The monitors they'd placed beeped their alarm. Dr. Morrison, who'd been waiting in the next room, came in and performed the formalities that declared life officially over. 4 children surrounded their father's body and wept with the particular grief of knowing they'd never quite said everything they meant to say, never quite healed all the wounds, never quite bridged all the distance. But they'd tried, and Ray had tried, and in the end, trying was all anyone could do. The funeral was held the following Tuesday at Cedar Falls Veterans Cemetery on a hill overlooking the valley. The Marine Honor Guard presented the flag with military precision. A bugler played taps while October Wind carried the notes across gravestones. Sheriff Braddock and Betty and Linda and half the town showed up to pay respects to a man who'd reminded them what courage looked like when age and death tried to make it irrelevant. The Iron Brotherhood stood in formation, leather vests and solemn faces, 8 veterans honoring one of their own. They saluted when the rifles fired 3 volleys, when the flag was folded, when Daniel accepted it with hands that shook. Tyler Brennan appeared on the cemetery's edge, escorted by 2 rehab counselors who'd given him 6 hours leave for this. 20 days sober now, looking healthier, but still fragile, standing at a distance like he wasn't sure he'd earned the right to be closer. Daniel saw him and waved him forward. Tyler approached hesitantly, stopping at Ray's graveside with tears streaming down his face. Sergeant spoke for the Brotherhood. Raymond Sullivan kept a promise to a brother who died 70 years ago. He saved that brother's grandson when nobody else would. He showed us all what honor really means. Semper Fi Marine. Your mission is complete. They lowered Ray's casket into Montana earth next to Martha's grave, reuniting a love story that cancer had interrupted, but never ended. Sarah threw in the first handful of dirt. Daniel followed. Mike and Tom. Then Tyler surprising everyone by stepping forward and adding his own handful while whispering words nobody else could hear. The service ended. People dispersed slowly, reluctant to leave, wanting to extract every last moment from this ceremony that marked the end of Raymond Sullivan's story. But stories don't really end when people die. They just change narrators. Tyler Brennan stood at Ray Sullivan's grave on a Tuesday morning in April, 6 months and 4 days sober, holding his 180-day chip like it was proof of something that still felt impossible. The Montana winter had released its grip on the Valley Spring, turning everything green in that brief window before summer arrived and turned it brown again. He'd brought flowers, wildflowers he'd picked himself because buying them felt wrong somehow. He arranged them on the grave with hands that had stopped shaking 2 months ago, that had learned to build things instead of destroy them, that now spent 40 hours a week in construction work alongside Daniel and the Brotherhood. Mr. Sullivan, Tyler said quietly, I'm 6 months clean today. Got my 180-day chip at the meeting this morning. Daniel says I'm ready to start my prospect period with the club. Says I've earned it. He pulled out the small Medal of Honor replica he'd bought online, a memorial version that wasn't the real thing, but represented it. I learned about my grandfather, about Pork Chop Hill, about what he did. You were right, he was a hero. And knowing I carry his blood, it makes me want to be better. The wind moved through cemetery trees carrying bird songs and the smell of grass and the feeling of life continuing regardless of who stayed or went. I'm working with other vets now. One struggling with addiction, using what I learned in rehab to help them. Daniel says that's how we honor the people who saved us, by saving others. So that's what I'm doing. Tyler traced Ray's name carved in granite. You saved my life when you didn't have to, when I didn't deserve it. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that. Trying to be the man my grandfather was. The man you were. He stood, saluted the grave the way he'd seen the Brotherhood salute, turned to leave and found Daniel waiting by the truck. His sponsor, now his boss, his friend, the son of the man who'd given Tyler a second chance when first chances had long since been exhausted. They drove back to Cedar Falls in comfortable silence, past the mountains that had witnessed Ray Sullivan's 81 years, past Crystal's Diner, where everything had started, past the clubhouse, where Tyler was learning what brotherhood meant from men who understood that warriors protect even when wounded, even when dying, even when the world insists protection is pointless. At the clubhouse, the Iron Brotherhood waited for Tyler's prospect ceremony. Sergeant would ask him why he wanted to join. Tyler would tell them about Tommy Chen, about Ray Sullivan, about debt that lasted beyond death and honor that passed forward generation to generation. They would vote. They would accept him because Ray had asked them to, and they kept their promises to fallen brothers. That evening, Tyler stood before 8 veterans and spoke his truth. I want to join because I need to learn how to protect instead of destroy. Because my grandfather died protecting others, and I want to honor that. Because Ray Sullivan showed me that broken people can be fixed if someone believes they're worth fixing. Because I'm Tommy Chen's grandson and Raymond Sullivan's legacy, and I need to become worthy of both those names. The vote was unanimous. Tyler became a prospect given a plain vest without patches, yet told he had a year to prove himself, to show he understood what brotherhood meant, to demonstrate that sobriety wasn't just a phase but a permanent state. He accepted those terms with the understanding that second chances came with responsibilities, that being saved meant saving others, that the debt Ray had paid forward was now Tyler's to continue. Months turned to years. Tyler stayed sober, earned his patches, became full brotherhood member. Started speaking at VA meetings about addiction and recovery, and how an 81-year-old Korean War veteran had saved his life by paying a debt to a man who'd been dead for 70 years. His story spread. Other veterans reached out. Tyler helped where he could save some lost others. Learned that trying mattered even when results disappointed. He met a woman at an AA meeting, someone who understood addiction from inside, who'd fought her own demons and won. They dated carefully, married quietly, had a son they named Raymond. Thomas Brennan Ray, for the man who'd saved Tyler's life. Thomas for the grandfather Tyler never met but carried with him always. When Raymond Thomas was old enough to understand, Tyler told him the story about Tommy Chen throwing himself on a grenade, about Ray Sullivan keeping a promise for 70 years, about how honor worked like compound interest growing across generations until it became something bigger than any individual life. The boy listened and asked, "So we have to protect people even when it's hard?" "Especially when it's hard. That's what makes it matter." Daniel Sullivan stood at his father's grave on the anniversary of his death. 52 turned 62, gray threading through hair that used to be black body, showing wear from 6 decades of hard living, but spirit still intact. Sarah stood beside him, 59 now, recently retired from teaching grandmother to 6 children who carried Ray's blood into futures he'd never see. The cemetery had grown new graves marking new losses, but Ray's spot on the hill remained pristine. Tyler came every week to maintain it, bringing flowers, pulling weeds, keeping the warrior's resting place worthy of the man who'd occupied it. Sarah spoke first. "I miss him. Still, every day. Me too." Daniel's voice was rough. "But I see him in Tyler, in the brotherhood, in every veteran we helped through the program." Pop's mission continues. "Do you think he knows wherever he is, if there's any justice, he's with Mom and Tommy? Chen finally at rest, finally free of the guilt he carried for 70 years. That's what I choose to believe anyway." They stood in silence, 2 of Ray Sullivan's 4 children, survivors of his particular brand of tough love and impossible expectations and emotional distance that had finally closed before death made it permanent. Mike and Tom had their own lives, their own ways of remembering their own relationships with a father who'd been complicated and difficult and ultimately human. A truck pulled up. Tyler climbing out with his son Raymond Thomas, now 8 years old, carrying flowers they'd picked together. The boy ran ahead to the grave, careful not to step on other markers, placing his flowers with the solemnity of someone who understood this ritual mattered. Tyler joined Daniel and Sarah. "Thought we might see you here." 10 years today. Daniel nodded. "Decades since he finished his mission. Since he saved your life. Best thing that ever happened to me was an 81-year-old Marine paying my drug debt and forcing me into rehab." Tyler watched his son arrange flowers. "I tell that story to every addict I work with now. Nobody believes it until I show them the documentation, the news articles, the proof that it actually happened. That was Pop. Did impossible things because someone had to, and he decided it might as well be him." Raymond Thomas ran back to his father. "Dad, I told Grandpa Ray about my baseball game. We won 7-4. I got 2 hits. Tyler ruffled his son's hair. "He'd be proud." The boy looked at Daniel. "Uncle Daniel, will you tell me the Korea story again?" "About Tommy Chen." Daniel knelt to the boy's level. "Tommy Chen was 20 years old, a Marine. When a grenade came into his bunker, he didn't think about himself. He thought about his brothers. He saved 3 men by sacrificing one. That's what warriors do. They protect, even when it costs everything. And Grandpa Ray kept the promise for 70 years. Then he saved your father. Then your father saved others. Now you carry that legacy. Someday you'll protect others too. That's how honor works. It passes forward." The boy nodded seriously, processing this inheritance of duty and protection and honor that stretched back through generations to a frozen hill in Korea where Tommy Chen had made an impossible choice and changed the trajectory of lives he'd never meet. They left the cemetery together, 4 people connected by one man's decision to pay a debt that couldn't be quantified or settled, but only honored through living, well protecting others. Remembering that courage wasn't about never falling, but about always getting back up, about standing for others when standing cost everything, about being the warrior the world needed, even when the world insisted warriors were obsolete. Ray Sullivan had been that warrior until his last breath. His legacy was Tyler's sobriety, Raymond Thomas's future, the dozens of veterans the Brotherhood helped every year, the small ripples of protection and honor that spread outward from one old man's decision to keep a promise to a dead friend. In the end, that's all any warrior could hope for, that their sacrifice mattered, that their service continued beyond their life, that the debt they'd paid forward would be honored by those who came after. Ray Sullivan's debt was paid, but the mission continued. It always would. That's what Tommy Chen had bought with his life on Porkchop Hill. That's what Ray had bought with his death in a Montana bedroom surrounded by family who loved him despite his flaws. That's what Tyler bought with his sobriety, and Raymond Thomas would someday buy with his own acts of protection and honor. The chain was unbroken. The mission endured. The warriors rested, but their work went on. Semper Fi Marine. Mission complete. But the story never ends. It just finds new narrators.